I'm going to invite everyone to open up your Bibles to Hebrews chapter 13. Hebrews 13. Hebrews 13. For everyone that was here last week, the verse we're going to read is going to be very familiar. Verse 4. Marriage is honorable in all, and the bed undefiled. But whoremongers and adulterers, God will judge. Before moving on, I want to express the context a little bit. Keep in mind now that we are in some of the application phases of the epistle. There's applications sprinkled throughout the whole thing. However, this is when he gets to a point of concluding, and before he finishes up, he wants to say, hey, remember these very important things to keep in mind for your life and for the glory of God as a result of all the things I was just writing to you about as it pertains to how Jesus is everything. That's kind of in a nutshell what Hebrews is about, and we've had the chance to take a look at the first few verses of this chapter so far. Let brotherly love continue as verse 1 moves on to verse 3, talking about entertaining strangers and also remembering those that are in bonds and afflictions. But then he moves into a more social matter, not as much as what pertains to just the body of Christ, which the first three verses is more directly involved with. But verse 4, he moves into this social issue, which of course the church is to uphold and continue. Now, last week I had the intention of bringing the subject to you, and it didn't go quite the way I had expected, quite the way I had planned. Okay? So what we're going to do is we're going to do something that I've probably never done before in the pulpit. I'm going to do round 2 of the same lesson practically. Kind of, but not really. You'll kind of see where I'm going with this. But what we have here, let's reread verse 4 just to really let us solidify it within our minds and see what the subject matter is. Hebrews 13 and verse 4 says, marriage is honorable in all, and the bed undefiled, but whoremongers and adulterers God will judge. So, what we're going to deal with today is the problem and the curse of abusing God's command and what God had set for us in the blessing of marriage. And what it deals with, in particular in this verse, is the subject of sexual immorality, which I'm going to be getting into in this lesson. Last week, my intent was to get into not only some of the issues of sexual immorality, but also the subject of marriage simultaneously at the same time and cover the same, in the same lesson, all of that material. And I realized that I was in over my head in the midst of it. And I was trying to cover way too much material. I was trying to rush through it. And then as a result of some of the negative feelings that I have about the subject, I started to become flooded and overwhelmed by a memory that I had from my childhood. And this is something that I wanted to go over with you so you're aware of some more of the details of why I ended up freezing in front of everybody last week. I want to talk about that with you. When I was 10 years old, I had just been baptized, and it was pretty rough times for the Church of Christ in Alameda, California, which is where I grew up, going to church. And after my grandpa passed away, my cousin was going to assume responsibilities of the role of being a preacher for that church. While they were getting the house ready, just like we have here in the parsonage, his wife went over to the house to let the carpet cleaner in and get the carpets shampooed. And this man tricked her into going into the house, and he raped her and murdered her there in that very house. And my last memory of her was her hugging me and congratulating me on my baptism. It was the very next day that she was butchered, brutally murdered. This kind of news actually made national headlines. It's very easy to look this information up. You just get on Google and just type in Trina Furmanek, and you will see all kinds of newspaper articles that were written on the subject. It actually caused kind of a wave of events that started people to have to do a lot more background checks before they hire people that go inside of people's homes. And most of the churches of Christ throughout the land were praying about this situation. It happened 28 years ago, so it's kind of starts to kind of fade from people's memories, but this is stuff that many of you probably remember or are aware of. Well, that was my cousin's wife murdered, and it impacted me quite deeply. And this is of the most grotesque examples of the problem that I'm going to talk about today with you. The author of Hebrews talks about marriage and the honor of marriage, how it is to be respected, but inevitably there is the problem of sexual immorality that disturbs the wondrousness and peacefulness and the honor of marriage that God had set in store for us. And even though the memory that I brought to your attention and I've just gone over in a little more detail with you is one of the most grotesque versions of that corruption, it is something that deeply affects all of our lives. In fact, it affects your lives directly just in the fact that if it wasn't for that, I probably wouldn't be a preacher. It was just a moment of God turning ashes into beauty that brought me here, because the man who took the place of my cousin ended up becoming my mentor. And if it wasn't for him, a lot of things probably wouldn't have happened that are good. So he inspired me, and I was inspired to see that there is still yet hope. And the gospel of Christ is the only place that there is hope. So as a result of that, I have committed myself to this task, but I am going to deal with this subject in a very raw fashion with you. That was my intent last week, and it just kind of fell apart. But here I am again, baby. You can't stop me. You see what I'm saying? So I'm going to deal with this subject, and I want you to know that I am aware of the fact that there are going to be people who are flooded with a lot of negative emotions as a result of what I talk about here today. Don't worry, we will always finish with the gospel of Christ, because these things happening down here are but temporal. We set our affections on things above, where God and Jesus and the Holy Spirit are waiting for us to get there. But until that moment, we're stuck with some of the garbage down here, you see. So we have a massive problem in American society. Sex has been hijacked. Sexual immorality reigns supreme throughout our land. One of the biggest problems, I think, is the fact that sex has been reduced to vanity and hocus pocus fantasy. And what I want to do is just give you a little bit of information on this subject, just from some of my research on the history of it, because even people in this room probably remember an age when it just wasn't that bad. I mean, it's always been horrible, don't get me wrong. And there's going to be lots of nuances and little details that I don't even have close to the time to get into, but I'm not expecting anybody here to look at me and say, well, it's not getting that bad, is it, Dave? I mean, you can see that it's getting worse. Sex in America is getting worse and more weird as time goes on, is what it seems. But there are people in here who actually kind of remember the 50s. Back when Desi and Lucy had separate beds. Even though they were married, it was so delicately dealt with in those days that they didn't even want the public to see a married couple, a fictional married couple, of course. Well, actually, they were actually married, weren't they? Anyway, but they didn't want the world or the people, the public, to see people in the same bed. That's how much more delicate it was in those days. Now, we're living in an age of revolutions. Started in like the 1800s, where we just started to see a massive shift in the way humans see the world. And as a result of some of the things that transpired because of World War I, people started to take a look at life in a whole different way. The whole world just changed, and literature started to increase. And when literature increased, people's courage to explore different ways of thinking and writing also started to take wing and started to move. But it didn't really start to take the massive shift until, as a result of the feminist movement and other things associated with that, in the 60s, for the first time, there was actual contraceptives that were quite effective. So as a result of mankind and the political agendas trying to make it there no difference between men and women, for the first time in the history of humanity, a woman could have sex with no children. That was never really the case on a grand scale. Remember, there's a lot of details I'm not going to get into. But on a grand scale, the general population and women in general could not engage in sexual activity without there being consequences. So therein lies one of the first lies, which started to become a lie that Satan started to use to infiltrate American culture and in the world around, which is sex ain't no big deal. You can engage in sex with no consequences. I mean, you don't have to worry about unwanted pregnancies nearly as much as you used to. So sex is no big deal. And what happened as a result of that, sex became reduced to the pleasure and the pleasure alone. Started to become corrupt. People will do it just for the sake of doing it. That is not what God made it for. That is not what He intended for sex to be. So, of course, more and more sexual relationships would happen outside of marriage because women could engage in it just as much as men without any trouble and didn't have to commit to the person or even worry about the consequences. Now, that's just one of the major lies, because the lie here is that you can engage in it without consequences, whereas the God of heaven very clearly states the opposite. Americans are kind of going around thinking, well, hey, just whatever feels good, do whatever you want, and there's basically no consequences. I actually listened to a TED Talk. TED Talk is one of those platforms of speaking where a lot of people just kind of share their ideas. It's much of the time kind of a sophisticated thing. People, who consider themselves to be the elite and educated like to engage and go in and listen to some of these TED Talks. There's a lot of good stuff and a lot of stuff that's garbage on TED Talks. The kind of stuff that they are sharing and some of the stuff that's being brought into the ears of these educated people is that literally they have skewed their research into saying, yeah, there are no long-term or there's no actual issues or effects from engaging in sexual pleasure without the commitment, and people think there are just no consequences. Well, what we are seeing is people have severed outside of sex what God originally put into sex. The heart, the soul, and the mind. Sex is about connecting. There's only one place where it is honored. The God of heaven's eyes. That is marriage. Without it, you find division. It brings forth confusion. It brings forth bitterness. Another lie is that this sexual revolution has caused there to be another lie. And that lie is that women are empowered because of it. I would contest that the opposite is true. I would contest that as a result, women have become objects. They have become public displays of soft-core, borderline pornography. They have become objects of private fantasy, bringing forth confusion, bitterness, and even rape. God gave women one of the most amazing and wonderful things as a result of sex: the ability to grow human life within them. And this is something that the God of heaven honors. Where Satan and the world is trying to cause us to believe that this is a dishonor. Many of the details and nuances that I don't have the time to get into. Many of them have to do with lots of the issues and other corruptions of mankind that have brought this to pass. We got to understand that what God said and the truth on these things. Women being sold, selling their bodies, that is not on. I want to show you a couple of verses that shed some light on this stuff. Now, that was just kind of a overall brief synopsis. I mean, how did I do? Did I do an okay job of kind of giving you like some of the history, just real condensed? Is that okay? Okay. I didn't fall apart. I didn't freeze. Huh? But now I want to take you to the scriptural portion of it and show you a couple of things from the word of the God of heaven. Proverbs chapter 9. Now I'm just going to take you to 4 main texts in this central portion of the lesson. Proverbs chapter 9. I'm going to take you to verses 13 through 18. Proverbs chapter 9 is one of my favorite chapters in the whole Bible for a couple of reasons. But the end of the chapter deals well with what we're talking about right now. Beginning in verse 13, it says, "A foolish woman is clamorous. She is simple and knows nothing." Now, what I want to do is make the case right here with this one verse that some of the lies that I have brought to your attention, how that sex has been reduced to a level of corruption and vanity, and the fact that many women think it's empowering to be able to do whatever they want and be promiscuous. I like to make the case that it's not just women here that are foolish, but all of mankind that is foolish as a result of this. I'm going to get into more of this kind of stuff a little bit later. But it is honestly my true and common belief that many of us have been duped by modern day culture. I'm going to talk to you about that in just a moment. But when it says here, a foolish woman is clamorous, she is simple, and she knows nothing. That is also applicable to each and every one of us who has been fooled by the media's and the world's and Satan's rhetoric on sex and sexual desire. So continuing in verse 14, it says, "She sits at the door of her house on a seat in the high places of the city. All passengers who go right on their way. Whoso was simple, let him go in there. And as for him who lacks understanding, She says to him, "Stolen waters are sweet, and bread eaten in secret is pleasant." He knows not that the dead are there, and that her guests are in the depths of hell. Now, this right here is a pretty broad description of something. When you look at the context, it's actually talking about foolishness, but the way sex has been hijacked into us believing lies about it, as opposed to what the God of heaven says about it, is very applicable to our circumstance and situation right here. Now, the main problem that I want to address with everyone in the room here this morning is that the problem we're talking about is pretty much a flipping upside down and a hijacking of what God has created. In other words, corrupted sex has been glorified as the giver of life and adventure. What I want to do is show you a couple of verses that deal with this idea of flipping things upside down and cloaking a lie and presenting it as truth, and then causing many people to be deceived thereby. First, I want to show you Isaiah chapter 5 and verse 20. And you know the reason why I'm showing you this verse? First of all, it's applicable. Second of all, it's one of Tony's favorites that he keeps on bringing to our attention in his Bible classes and whatnot. The context of the book of Isaiah is about the degradation of the nation of Judah. And some of the things that we're talking about here and now are involved with what was happening in Judah at the time. But this one verse makes this statement. Woe unto them that call evil good and good evil, that put darkness for light and light for darkness, and put bitter for sweet and sweet for bitter. See what this does is showing the fact that what is happening in the world is just taking things that are corruptible and things that are degrading and then flipping it upside down and presenting it as if it's a good thing. Good things are presented as evil. Light is presented as darkness, and the opposite is also happening. So what I was just talking about with the sexual revolution and what's happening with it is this is actually happening in the world today, and it's also trickling into the ears of even the believers. Now take a look at Psalm 12 with me. I want to show you something there now too. Psalm 12, King David is writing this psalm, and he makes a concern of his brought to the ears of the God of heaven in the form of prayer. And what he does here is he shows us some of the style for which evil takes place in the world and creeps its way in. Psalm 12, beginning in verse 1. Help, Lord, for the godly man ceases, and the faithful fail from among the children of men. They speak vanity, every one with his neighbor, with flattering lips, and with a double heart do they speak. The Lord shall cut off all flattering lips, the tongue that speaks proud things. Who has said, with our tongue we will prevail. Our lips are our own. Who is Lord over us? Stop there just for a moment. I want to break this down with you to show you why I'm bringing it to your ears moment. First off, David's concern is that even the good people, even the godly, even the faithful are struggling with it. Even God's people, even God's chosen, even the church is struggling with these issues. It's impacting all of us. One of the ways that I began the lesson was by showing you just one of the things that I, in my lifetime, went through as a result of the corruption here. Now, it may not have been me who was engaged in that, but it has affected my life. And what we have seen in the world today is a trickle and a deception that is even affecting God's chosen. There is a reason why there are so many people, even in the church right now, that are struggling. And it's because of the attitudes brought forth in here. Now, he says, they speak vanity, everyone with his neighbor, flattering lips. Now, there's just an overall inconsistency with the way we're dealing with it. When you think about the way the children of Israel were engaged with God when they were in the 40 years wandering in the wilderness, and then when they finally made it to the promised land, keep in mind now and remember some of the things that they were doing. They kept on saying to God, God, we will serve you. We will do what you say. And every time God, well, not every single time, but many of the times that God would say, listen to me and do what I say, they just kept on ignoring his advice. And as a result, they kept on finding more and more curse upon them. And now this is one of the subjects that it's so easy to turn our faces and to not really deal with these problems that are happening in society. And it's simultaneously one of the most sensitive subjects that you can talk about. Parents have a real hard time, especially my parents, and like a lot of like the older generations, like having like talking to the parents about this kind of stuff. I've actually mentioned in this pulpit before. I'm still waiting for my dad to have a sex talk with me. It still hasn't happened. I'm saying, oh, I'm gonna see him for Thanksgiving. I'm gonna sit him down, you know, have that awkward like now, son. But I'm gonna be like, now, Dad, I need to talk to you about the birds and the bees, and like let him know that's how awkward, that's how sensitive, that's how vulnerable of a subject this can be. Now, at the same time, this subject that contaminates people, that causes so many people to go through psychological and emotional issues throughout the whole life, and addictions and abuses and problems, and dealing just the fact of dealing with the memory of someone that you love being raped and murdered, so much catastrophe. It's so sensitive, while simultaneously it's the most gloated over, the most abused, and one of the most talked about subjects at the same time. Now, how does that make sense? Now, here's one of the weird things. It's the good people usually who don't want to talk about it, and it's the horrific people that want to talk about it. It's the media that wants to talk about it, but we don't want to talk about it. It was so weird for me. I froze in front of y'all last week. That was how hard it was for me to talk about this subject. Stop and think about that for a second. But hey, they don't have a problem talking about it in the sitcom. They don't have a problem talking about it in the schools. They don't have a problem talking about it in actual trainings for the teachers. They don't got a problem talking about it with comedians in front of a whole group of people laughing about it. There's no trouble there. Politicians don't have any trouble talking about it, but we do. And that's got to change. That's why I'm up here talking about it right now. Because we need to set the record straight. Take a look at the end of Psalm 12 with me. And one of the things called into question here is what God says versus what man says, correct? Take a look at verse 6. I'm going to read to the end of the psalm. The words of the Lord are pure words, as silver tried in a furnace of earth, purified 7 times. You shall keep them, O Lord, you will preserve them from generation forever. Now look at verse 8. The wicked walk on every side when the vilest men are exalted. Here's one of the reasons why this is so important, why I'm bringing that up right now, is because humanity has exalted this problem. And all the people who are willing to talk about it, the people who even publicize it and even commercialize it, are exalted. When that happens, we have the result told to us exactly what's going to happen. Verse 8, the wicked walk on every side when the vilest men are exalted. When horrific, disgusting things, abominations before the God of heaven is exalted, guess what's going to happen? People are going to just be walking around all over the place without even, as Jeremiah the prophet said, aren't even going to be able to blush about their sin. So, this degradation process of the way we look at this supposed to be beautiful thing has been brought to our ears in the Roman epistle, chapter 1, in a type of a sequence, in an orderly way. And now I want to take you over there and show you something out of there. Romans chapter 1. Now, in this particular text, what we're going to find in the first chapter of the Roman epistle is a generic description of the degradation of humanity. Because the further we get away from God, the more grotesque, right? The more corruptible mankind becomes. And it gets worse and worse and worse. And the apostle here starts to use a certain style of talking where he writes, actually saying things like, even this kind of stuff started to happen. It's the kind of way he's going to talk. But because our subject at hand is sexual immorality, I want you to read it with me, keeping in mind that subject directly and specifically. And of course, as a result of such degradation, many other facets of humanity get messed up and corrupted. But we're going to see how it unfolds here in this chapter. So, let's take a look at it. Romans chapter 1, verse 20. For the invisible things of him from the creation of the world are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even his eternal power and Godhead, so they are without excuse. Now, like I was saying, one of the things that would be applicable here, the invisible things pertaining to a pure sexual relationship. There are invisible things that God has set in order that we cannot see, but they're clearly seen from what God's word presents to us. There is a natural beauty in the way God set it up. Going on now to verse 21, it says, because that they knew God, they glorified him not as God, and neither were thankful, but became vain in their imaginations. The foolish heart was darkened. So you can see the degradation process beginning with not glorifying God and what he says, and also not even showing him thanksgiving, and starting to turn and want other things beyond what God has set in store, what God has set in order. And it says that what happens as a result of this is the imaginations start to become vain. So stop and think about that as it relates to our subject. That vanity starts to consumed the imaginations of people. Now, there's a reason why I started with the history. I want to just bring this to your ears at this moment. The reason why I started with the history is because much of the imagination in the common man started getting more and more corrupted as a result of the historical opening up of the doors. Like when the lie was told, you can do whatever you want without consequence. What happened as a result of that is more imagination and more reduction started to happen to the subject, such that it moved and snowballed into an era so where that basically anything goes. And the imagination has become so corrupt, and he's going to actually address subjects just like this, but it just starts with doing it outside of marriage, okay? That's a corruption in and of itself, but it gets weirder and weirder. That was weird at one time. It's no longer weird anymore. That was weird at one time. Then it gets more and more and more weird to the point that, as everyone knows about from society, all you got to do is turn on the news, or get on your smartphone, and you can see the kind of stuff that's happening in the world today. It has gotten so weird that literally anything goes, and this problem is castrating men and causing women to be objects, and it's gotten so weird such that in these last couple of years, men are being awarded Woman of the Year. Now that makes everyone here kind of go, oh, but you know what? The original corruption of the sexual relationship is weird to God. The way we react to that, we got desensitized to the way things are going on in the world today. And the only way to have a weird reaction, you can turn on almost any sitcom nowadays, and it talks about people will be all hooking up left and right, and none of us even like grimace at it anymore. None of us even get red in the face anymore. Whereas just 50 years ago, people felt weird about a married couple being in the same bed. Think about that now for a second. We have become so desensitized, we barely even notice it anymore, unless it's men being castrated and calling themselves women. That's what it takes to make us feel weird now. That's weird. We should be struggling with the original corruption. You know, when we Christians get on our high horse, we feel like the world's going crazy. It's easy to point to the most weird of it all. But indeed, we must look in the mirror and see what we have done in our own lives. We've all been hijacked. All of us. Somehow, some way. It's been degraded to the point that verse 22 says, professing themselves to be wise, they became fools. You've seen the debates, I'm sure, of these people who act like they're wise, and they're telling us about all their crazy rhetoric and theories and everything, and they act like they're wise, and it is incredibly foolish. Verse 23, change the glory of the uncorruptible God into an image made like the corruptible man, a four-footed beast, creeping things. Verse 24, he says, wherefore God also gave them up to uncleanness through the lust of their own hearts, to dishonor their own bodies between themselves, who changed the truth of God into a lie. Does all sound familiar? Does all sound like things that we have been engaged in, things that we have been just okay with, turning it on the TV and not even noticing hardly? Just stop and think about it for a second. Change the truth of God into a lie and worship and serve the creature more than the Creator, who is blessed forever. Amen. Verse 26, it says, for this cause God gave them up to vile affections, and even their women did change their natural use into that which is against nature. And likewise also men, leaving the natural use of the woman, buried or burned in their lust one toward another, men with men, working that which is unproper and receiving in themselves the reward that was due unto them. You see, this is not news. It's not new stuff. The only difference is the way it's impacted modern day society in the grand scale as it has, because it's being attacked at every angle in your life right now. And the whole point for me to get up here and start yelling at you about it is to open your eyes and open your ears to what is really happening, to increase your prayers on this stuff. Because I sat down and I just made a little list, not even close to an exhaustive list, but it made me a list of just some of the ways that these things are, through the means of communication, are just seeping in on us, messing with us. And it's a manifestation of the universal and overwhelming nature of the floodgates of Satan's attack, not really just on you, especially on our children. Sex, which God has created, has been reduced to jokes. The corruption of it is being trained in schools, like actually trained in the school. Like actually trained in the school. Stop and think about it. Actually trained. Like it's being forced. It's being shoved down the throats. It's being indoctrinated. It's being taught to the kids as truth by authority figures. You can no longer say to your kids, respect your authority, because your authority is nuts. Because your authority has gone psycho. So you can't just say to your kids, listen to your teacher anymore, because your teacher is psycho now. Because the system is psycho. You can't do it anymore. That's what's happening in the world today. Movies. You turn on a movie, you think it's innocent. It ain't innocent. They got this stuff just sprinkling throughout the whole movie. You remember I made a statement just a moment ago how women are being reduced to public displays of softcore pornography? What do you think that does to men? Why do you think they're doing it? Because it increases numbers. It increases the profits. That's it. It's messing with your sons' heads. It's messing with your daughters' heads. Dressing like prostitutes is not supposed to be a good thing. Prostitution is something that people have a hard time with. Now it's just okay. But that's not the world we're growing up in anymore. It's so corrupt, it's so messed up that this is becoming normalized. I don't know how to preach this kind of stuff without yelling. Maybe I'll try it. Politics. Yes. Your state voted for this kind of stuff. This great state, I love this state. I grew up in this state. I love that I can surf in the morning and go snowboarding in the afternoon on the same day. I don't actually do that. It sounds cooler when I say it, but I don't actually do that. I love this state. But the leaders of this state have voted for disgusting things on behalf of your children. Cancel culture. You speak against this? I already know of some YouTube people that have been canceled because of speaking up on this kind of stuff. So that's what your kids are growing up with? Oh, you all know I'm about to go there. Smartphones. TikTok. YouTube. What other stuff they got out there? Oh, is Facebook kind of bad? Is that bad too? They seem to do a lot better, huh? But no. You know what I'm saying? And that's just public social media. That's not even touching truckloads and truckloads and truckloads and train loads and massive shiploads of pornography that is on anybody's access. Anybody can just get to it. And you think you're protecting your kids. They know all around it. They can get around it. All they gotta do is go to their friend's house. They can get around it. I remember when it was coming out. I've always tried to stay pure on this stuff, but I remember when it was coming out. We were in the public school system. I was in middle school. The schools had security set in place. The kid right next to me, all I had to do was type in a couple of words to get around the system. You think your kids are safe? You have no idea. Or maybe you do have an idea. I don't know. This ain't no joke. Talking about women becoming objects and being reduced. Private fantasy. Marketing, advertising, music. I'm going to be talking about the subject of marriage. I was supposed to talk about it the last couple of Sundays. I realized I needed to preach like a whole lot more on the subject of sex before I got to marriage. One of the reasons why I got overwhelmed last week. I'm going to be talking about a lot of things. I'm going to be, like I said, be getting pretty raw with everyone. And it's all with purpose, and it's all for the sake of the gospel of Christ, I assure you. It's all for the sake of protecting your kids, protecting my kids, protecting everybody in this room. But I'll share with you a little story. Just like pretty much everyone of my generation has been exposed to a lot of these things. I'm not going to pretend like I haven't seen a lot of this garbage. But through prayer and through the Word of God, have basically conquered a lot of this stuff, though it was not easy. But I was listening to a song just the other day, and it was like the most innocent of all music, funk. That was supposed to be a joke. I was listening to a funk song, and one of the women started singing, and she just had a fine voice. Started messing with my head. That's just the struggle of a man. It's a struggle that we go through. It's tough. And that's not even talking about some of the absolutely disgusting stuff that is publicized in music today. I miss the days when the Temptations were singing about my girl. Miss the days when it was all about I'm all shook up. And then it started to shift and a change from actual ballads into the music that your kids and your kids' friends are hearing. And they aren't even hiding. They aren't even masking it anymore. I'm just going to say one word. Some of you are going to get it, some of you won't. WAP. Straight up. They ain't even hiding it anymore. They will be running. When the God of heaven shows up, they will be running. But we won't be running. But these people are messing with your kids, your grandkids. These things have become a Trojan horse. Seemingly innocent fun, It has hijacked you and your kids, sacrificing them at Satan's altar of divorce, rape, and pedophilia. That's just the truth. So what's my point? Be not deceived. The problem is with grief. Souls will be lost because. But it's not a lesson about hopelessness. It's also not a lesson about guilt. Guilt paralyzes a lot of people. We have to be able to call it what it is and bring the truth out, but it's not about guilt. I didn't stand up here and kind of start yelling and doing all that kind of stuff to make everyone feel bad. I actually want people to feel hope. I want people to realize and understand that even though we're all guilty, Jesus helps us conquer all. There is no hope in all that stuff. But there is hope in the gospel of Christ. It really is why he hung on a cross, because of this stuff. Because many of us and many of our kids are going to go through this now. Jesus made this statement. And the statement is the answer. The Spirit of God is upon me, because he has anointed me to preach the gospel to the poor, heal the brokenhearted, preach deliverance to the captives, bring recovering sight to the blind, bring liberty to the bruised. We've all been poor. We've all been brokenhearted. We've all been captives. We've all been blind. Every one of us has been bruised by the subject matter that we discussed today. Jesus has the power to free us from it all. Therefore, I have decided to follow Jesus. Go and sing. I have decided to follow Jesus. I have decided to follow